It was a tense afternoon at an international economic forum in Geneva. Delegates from every continent had gathered to discuss global economic stability in a multipolar world. Cameras flashed as world leaders entered the grand hall, each carrying the weight of their nations on their shoulders. Among them, two figures stood out for entirely different reasons: JD Vance, the sharp-tongued American politician known for his unapologetic defense of U.S. dominance, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso who had become a rising symbol of African sovereignty. When their names appeared on the same panel list, the media swarmed. Headlines in every major outlet hinted at a potential clash. "America's voice meets Africa's lion," one newspaper read. Vance walked in with the confident smirk of a man who believed every room belonged to him. Traoré entered moments later, not with arrogance, but with the calm composure of someone who had nothing to prove, yet everything to defend. The discussion began politely enough. Vance spoke first, praising America's role in guiding developing nations toward stability. But as he leaned closer to the microphone, his tone sharpened. "The reality," he said, looking directly at Traoré, "is that you will need us eventually. Without American partnerships, economies like yours cannot survive the storms of globalization." The audience shifted in their seats, some nodded, others frowned. Traoré took a slow breath before answering. His voice was steady, almost too calm for the weight of his words. "Senator," he said, "Burkina Faso has needed you never. And yet, here we stand." The room went silent for a beat, the kind of silence where even camera shutters hesitate. Somewhere in the back row, a journalist whispered to his colleague, "This is going to be tomorrow's headline." The moderator tried to ease the tension with a neutral question about shared goals, but the air was already electric. Vance leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, a faint smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Captain," he said, "I admire your confidence. But confidence doesn't pay for infrastructure. It doesn't build highways or power grids. Those things come from investment, our investment." His words were sharp, calculated to sound like wisdom, but dripping with condescension. A few members of the audience nodded in agreement, particularly Western delegates. But in the African bloc, whispers began to rise. Traoré's eyes never left Vance. "And yet," he replied, "we are building highways and power grids right now, without waiting for your approval or your money." He gestured subtly toward the African leaders in attendance. "We have partners who believe in cooperation, not ownership." The comment landed like a stone dropped in water, ripples of murmurs spread through the room. Cameras zoomed in on Vance's face, his smirk faltered for the first time. The American politician leaned forward again. "Without us," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "your nation's progress is temporary." Traoré's response came without hesitation. "Then maybe it's time you understood, our independence is permanent." The crowd erupted in a mixture of applause and gasps. The moderator's polite smile had frozen, sensing this panel was no longer about economic theory, but about who truly holds power in the modern world. Outside the hall, social media was already exploding. Clips of the exchange were going viral, with hashtags like #NeededYouNever and #Traoré vs Vance trending in multiple languages. Analysts on live broadcasts began calling it the moment Africa stared Washington in the eye and didn't blink. By the second half of the panel, it was no longer just a discussion, it was a duel. Every sentence carried an undertone of challenge. Vance adjusted his tie, adopting a tone meant to project authority. "Let's be realistic, Captain," he said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. "Global markets run on trust. And trust comes from established powers like the United States. Without aligning with us, you risk isolation. No trade deals. No security guarantees. No access to the global stage." A murmur of agreement came from a cluster of Western diplomats, but Traoré barely moved. His calmness contrasted sharply with Vance's assertive posture. "Isolation?" Traoré finally replied. We've heard that threat before. The truth is, when you build real partnerships, equal partnerships, you don't need someone else's permission to be on the world stage. The tension broke into applause from the African bloc and several Latin American delegates. Cameras captured every reaction: Vance's tight jaw, Traoré's unwavering gaze. It was the image of two worlds colliding, one clinging to an old order, the other determined to define its own. Trying to regain control of the narrative, Vance leaned toward his microphone. You speak of equality, but history shows that without guidance, nations often lose their way. The statement hung in the air, heavy with implication. Traoré's eyes narrowed slightly. History also shows, he said, that those who claim to guide often lead others where only they benefit. We have no interest in walking that path. The audience erupted once more, the sound almost drowning out the moderator's attempts to move on. Outside the hall, news networks replayed the exchange in looping clips. Analysts debated whether Vance had underestimated his opponent. One commentator on live TV put it bluntly: this wasn't just about economics. It was about power, and Traoré refused to kneel. The moderator, clearly aware that the tension was now the main attraction, decided to let the exchange continue. Perhaps, she suggested carefully, we can explore what cooperation might look like between your nations. But Vance wasn't interested in soft landings. He turned to Traoré, his expression sharpened. Cooperation is built on mutual respect, Captain. But let's be honest, your country's security, your economy, even your political stability, all benefit from the framework we've created. If we were to step back, you'd feel the consequences immediately. The statement was calculated, almost a dare. The hall went quiet except for the faint hum of the cameras. Traoré leaned forward slightly, his tone still measured but unmistakably firm. Senator, if you believe our sovereignty depends on your presence, then you haven't been paying attention. We've been strengthening our defenses, building our economy, and empowering our people, without waiting for your green light. A wave of applause came from the African and Asian delegations. Some European leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others scribbled notes, sensing this was more than political theater, it was a statement of intent. Vance's jaw tightened. Intent doesn't feed people. Intent doesn't stop insurgencies. Intent doesn't hold the line when the world turns hostile. Traoré met his gaze without blinking. Neither does dependency. And that's the difference: you've built a system where others rely on you. We're building one where we rely on ourselves. In the press box, journalists were already drafting headlines. One whispered to another, "This is the sound of an old guard being challenged in real time." The viral moment was no longer a question, it was a certainty. By now, every camera in the room was locked on the two men. The tension had gone beyond politics, it felt personal. Vance leaned in, his voice low but carrying the weight of a warning. Captain, you may think you're winning in this room, but the real battles aren't fought here. They're fought in boardrooms, in financial markets, in the quiet corridors where deals are made. And in those places, without our support, your voice will fade. Traoré's reply came instantly, his tone still calm but layered with steel. Then perhaps it's time those corridors heard new voices. Voices that aren't echoing the same old orders. We've spent decades being told we need your approval to succeed, yet every real step forward we've taken happened when we acted on our own terms. A sharp murmur of agreement ran through the African and South American delegations. Even a few Asian diplomats were nodding subtly. Vance caught the shift in the room but pushed on, his pride unwilling to yield. It's easy to talk about independence when you've never faced the full weight of the consequences. The world can be unforgiving. Traoré gave a faint, knowing smile. We've lived through the unforgiving world you speak of. The difference is, we learned to survive it without depending on those who caused it. The statement landed like a thunderclap. Some in the audience sat back, visibly stunned by the bluntness. In the press section, one journalist whispered, that's the quote that's going to define this summit. And he was right. Within minutes, the clip was already being clipped, subtitled, and shared online. Hashtags like hashtag no approval needed and hashtag Traoré challenge began climbing trends, carrying the exchange far beyond the walls of the conference hall. The moderator, sensing the moment had slipped entirely into a showdown, gave a hesitant smile but didn't interrupt. The hall was electric, delegates leaning forward, journalists scribbling furiously, cameras clicking non-stop. Vance, unwilling to let the last remark stand, raised his chin. "You speak as if the world owes you a platform, Captain. But platforms are built by those with power, influence, and resources. That's why, whether you like it or not, you'll need us to keep standing." Traoré didn't flinch. "Senator, the problem with your thinking is that it assumes we are standing on your platform. We are not. We are standing on our own soil, building with our own hands. And the stronger we get, the less we hear the noise from those who think they own the stage." This time, the applause was immediate and deafening from much of the Global South delegation. Even some European representatives, long allies of the US, exchanged wary glances, as though wondering if the old hierarchy was slipping away faster than expected. Vance pressed his palms together, forcing a thin smile. Strong words. But strength isn't proven in speeches, it's proven when the pressure comes. Traoré's answer was measured, almost quiet, but it carried across the room. "Then apply the pressure, Senator. You may find that the ones you thought were weakest can carry more weight than you ever imagined." The moment hit social media like a lightning strike. Within an hour, major outlets were running headlines such as, "Traoré to Vance, we stand without you," and, "A new voice at the table." On TikTok, short clips of the exchange, cut with dramatic captions, were pulling in millions of views. Comment sections filled with variations of the same sentiment: "This is the shift we've been waiting for." The debate had long since stopped being about policy. It was now a symbolic clash between two visions of the world, one clinging to established dominance, the other insisting on sovereignty without permission. Vance leaned back, as if preparing to deliver a final, decisive blow. "Captain, the truth is simple. In every major crisis, countries turn to us. When famine hits, when wars break out, when markets crash, it's our aid, our technology, our resources that keep the world from collapsing. And you will find, in time, that no matter how loudly you declare independence, there will come a day you call for us." Traoré tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in a quiet certainty that comes from lived experience. "We've already lived through days when we called, Senator. And what we learned is that help tied to chains is not help, it's control. We have chosen a harder road, but it is ours. And in walking it, we will never again need to ask for what should have been our own from the beginning." The room fell into a thick silence, broken only by the sound of camera shutters clicking. The weight of his words settled heavily over the delegates. Some Western leaders shifted in their seats, others stared at Traoré with newfound respect. On social media, the quote exploded. Twitter feeds lit up with side-by-side clips, Vance issuing his confident prediction, and Traoré dismantling it with quiet conviction. Hashtags like hashtag hard road is ours and hashtag chains are not help trended globally. Commentators began framing the exchange as a defining moment, not just for the summit, but for the shifting balance of influence in world politics. For the first time that day, Vance didn't have a ready comeback. He glanced down at his notes, then back at Traoré, as if reassessing the man sitting across from him. The realization was creeping in: this wasn't a leader looking for validation. This was a leader who had already decided he didn't need it. The moderator finally interjected, attempting to steer the discussion back toward the agenda. But the air was already too charged, and the room too invested, for anyone to simply move on. Vance, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, shifted to a more patronizing tone. "Captain Traoré, it's admirable that you speak with such conviction. But conviction without capacity is just rhetoric. And capacity, real capacity, requires alliances, resources, and the networks we've built for generations. Without them, you risk leading your people into isolation. Traoré leaned forward slightly, his expression unwavering. Isolation, Senator, is when you have to ask permission to act in your own interest. True connection between nations is built on respect, not dependency. We are not cutting ourselves off from the world, we are cutting ourselves free from the parts of it that hold us back. A few seats away, a South American diplomat gave a subtle nod of agreement. Across the aisle, an African Union representative whispered to a colleague, "This is history in the making." Vance chuckled, as if dismissing the comment, but the sound didn't carry the confidence it once did. "You think you can rewrite the rules of engagement?" he asked. Traoré's answer was calm, almost gentle. "We are not rewriting your rules, Senator. We are writing our own." The word spread like wildfire through the press section. Reporters rushed to send live updates, and within minutes, international headlines mirrored the sentiment, Traoré to Vance, respect, not dependency. On Instagram, clips of the exchange gained millions of views in hours, set to dramatic background music and bold captions. What unsettled Vance most wasn't just the applause, it was the unmistakable realization that Traoré wasn't playing defense. He was on the offensive, not to attack, but to assert. And in that assertion lay a confidence that could not be broken by warnings, threats, or the weight of history. By now, the summit hall had transformed into something more than a diplomatic gathering, it was an arena. The tension was palpable, but beneath it, there was also an undeniable sense of change, like the shifting of tectonic plates no one could stop. Vance tried one last pivot. "Captain Traoré, you talk about freedom as if it's a destination. But the truth is, the world is interconnected. Without alignment with powers like ours, your progress will be limited. Trade routes, security frameworks, global markets, these are not things you can simply opt out of without paying the price." Traoré let a brief silence hang before responding. "Senator, progress isn't measured by how closely we orbit around others, it's measured by how far we can move under our own power. And the price you speak of? We've been paying it for generations. Now, we choose to invest in ourselves, even if it means walking a harder road." His tone wasn't defiant, it was resolute. That subtle difference made it all the more powerful. Several African delegates exchanged looks of admiration, while even a few Asian and Latin American representatives nodded in agreement. A reporter from a French outlet whispered to her cameraman, "This isn't just a speech, it's a declaration." Vance exhaled sharply, leaning back with folded arms. "You make it sound noble. But nobility doesn't keep your lights on when the world turns its back." Traoré's eyes locked on his. "Senator, if the world turns its back on us, perhaps it was never the world, it was just a club. And we have no interest in rejoining a club built on keeping us small." The audience erupted into applause again, louder this time. The moderator's attempts to move on were futile. On social media, hashtags like #OurOwnPower and #NotYourClub surged to the top trends. It was no longer just a political exchange, it had become a viral moment, immortalized in seconds-long clips, shared millions of times. The closing moments of the session felt less like an end and more like the start of something irreversible. Delegates were still buzzing from the exchange, cameras flashing as reporters swarmed the press area. The moderator gave up on the agenda entirely, choosing instead to let the two men deliver their final words. Vance straightened his tie, speaking with deliberate calm. "Captain Traoré, speeches like yours stir emotions. But emotions fade. When the realities of global politics set in, you'll find yourself back at the table, this time, on our terms." Traoré didn't rush his reply. He let the pause breathe, his eyes scanning the room as if to address not just Vance, but every leader watching. "Senator, the difference between us is simple, you believe power is given. We know it's built. And we will never again sit at a table where our seat exists only because someone allowed it. Our terms are our own. The words hit with the weight of finality. For a moment, even Vance's expression faltered, just enough for the cameras to catch it. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous, a standing ovation from a surprising mix of nations, some long aligned with Western powers, others quietly waiting for this kind of defiance to find a voice. Outside the summit hall, journalists rushed to broadcast the moment. Within hours, the clip had millions of views across platforms, spliced into montages with captions like, "Power is built, not given," and "Our terms are our own." Later that evening, as Traoré walked through the hotel lobby, a small group of young African delegates approached him. "You didn't just speak for Burkina Faso," one said, voice trembling with emotion. "You spoke for all of us." Traoré smiled faintly. "Then make sure my words are only the beginning." The summit would be remembered for many things, but above all, for the day a warning was met not with fear, but with a promise of independence that no threat could undo. Today was not just about words, it was about drawing a line in the sand. Senator Vance, your warnings are echoes of an old world, one where power was a gift granted from the few to the many. But we have seen the truth. Power is not given, it is built. And in Africa, we are building it brick by brick, field by field, mind by mind. We will trade, we will partner, we will engage, but on our own terms. We will never again be told that our place at the table exists because someone else decided we deserve it. That era is over. To those who believe we will crumble without their hand on our shoulder, I say, watch us stand taller than ever. And to those who stand with us in respect and equality, our door is open. We do not need permission to dream, and we will not ask for approval to rise. The time for dependency is gone. The time for dignity has begun. Asterisk.